Sarah Chen had always been different from other pilots at Riverside Municipal Airport. While her colleagues flew sleek Cessnas and powerful twin-engine aircraft, she proudly maintained what everyone else called the flying lawnmower. Her Robinson R-22 helicopter was indeed small, painted bright yellow with faded decals, and made considerably more noise than the fixed-wing aircraft that dominated the hangar space. The other pilots never missed an opportunity to make jokes about Sarah's choice of aircraft. During their weekly coffee gatherings at the airport diner, Tom Bradley, who owned a pristine Piper Cherokee, would often gesture toward the hangar where Sarah's helicopter sat and shake his head. "I still can't believe someone actually pays hangar fees for that toy," he would say, causing the other pilots to chuckle into their coffee cups. Sarah had purchased the helicopter 3 years earlier from a flight training school that was upgrading their fleet. The aircraft was 15 years old, had accumulated significant flight hours, and required constant maintenance that Sarah performed herself in the evenings after her day job as an emergency room nurse. She had learned to fly helicopters during her military service, where she operated medical evacuation flights in difficult terrain. The skills she developed there had never left her, even though she now lived in the relatively flat landscape of central Missouri. The mockery intensified whenever Sarah attempted to participate in local flying events. During the annual poker run, where pilots would fly to different airports to collect playing cards, the other participants would joke that Sarah's helicopter was so slow she would still be flying to the first checkpoint while they completed the entire circuit. "Maybe we should give Sarah a head start," Mike Rodriguez, who flew a fast Mooney, suggested during one pre-event briefing. "Say, about 6 hours?" What her fellow pilots did not understand was that Sarah's helicopter represented something much more meaningful than simple transportation. Growing up in a family that struggled financially, she had learned to value functionality over appearance. Her father, a mechanic who worked on farm equipment, had taught her that the most reliable machines were often the ones that looked the worst. "Pretty things break when you need them most," he would tell her while they worked together on tractors and combines in their small repair shop. Sarah's helicopter reflected this philosophy perfectly. The aircraft might not have impressed anyone with its appearance, but she had methodically rebuilt every critical component. The engine had been overhauled by a certified mechanic, but Sarah had assisted with every step of the process, learning exactly how each part functioned. She had rewired the electrical system, replaced worn control linkages, and even reupholstered the seats with heavy-duty material that could withstand constant use. The helicopter's instruments were basic compared to the modern avionics packages installed in many of the airport's fixed-wing aircraft. But Sarah knew every gauge and switch by heart. She had spent countless hours practicing emergency procedures, including auto-rotation landings that allowed helicopters to land safely even with complete engine failure. Her military training had emphasized preparation for the worst-case scenarios, and she maintained those standards in civilian flying. Despite the constant jokes from other pilots, Sarah found genuine satisfaction in maintaining and flying her helicopter. Every weekend morning, she would arrive at the airport before dawn to inspect the aircraft, checking oil levels, examining rotor blades for damage, and testing all control movements. The ritual reminded her of her military service, where attention to detail meant the difference between successful missions and tragedy. The helicopter's small size, which provided endless ammunition for jokes, actually offered significant advantages that most people overlooked. The aircraft could land in spaces no larger than a basketball court, hover precisely next to buildings or trees, and operate from unprepared surfaces that would damage fixed-wing aircraft. Sarah had used these capabilities several times to help local law enforcement search for missing persons in dense forest areas where conventional aircraft could only circle overhead. Local newspaper reporters had written articles about Sarah's volunteer search and rescue work, describing her helicopter as a valuable community asset. The articles mentioned how she had located several lost hikers and had assisted in medical evacuations from remote areas where ambulances could not reach patients. However, the pilots at Riverside Municipal Airport seemed more interested in discussing aircraft performance specifications than reading about community service. The situation became particularly uncomfortable during the monthly Pilots Association meetings, where Sarah would sit quietly while others discussed their flying experiences. When the conversation turned to aircraft capabilities, someone would inevitably make a comment about Sarah's helicopter being suitable only for putting around the airport pattern. These comments stung because Sarah knew her aircraft's true capabilities, but she also understood that defending the helicopter would only invite more ridicule. One particularly difficult evening occurred during a meeting where several pilots were planning a group flight to a fly-in event at a distant airport. The flight would cover nearly 300 miles, and Tom Bradley suggested that participants should fly aircraft capable of cruising at least 100 knots to maintain formation. "That rules out certain aircraft we all know about," he said while glancing meaningfully toward Sarah. Sarah realized she was being deliberately excluded from the group flight, not because her helicopter lacked the range or capability to make the trip, but because the other pilots considered her aircraft an embarrassment to their flying club. The helicopter could easily complete the flight, though it would require a fuel stop that the faster aircraft could skip. Sarah had made similar flights many times during her military service, often in much worse weather conditions, and without the luxury of multiple alternate airports along the route. The rejection hurt more than Sarah cared to admit, particularly because she genuinely enjoyed the camaraderie of group flying. Some of her best memories from military service involved formation flights with other helicopters, working together to complete challenging missions. She missed the sense of teamwork and shared purpose that came from flying with other pilots who respected her skills and aircraft. Rather than confronting the other pilots about their attitude, Sarah chose to focus on activities where her helicopter's unique capabilities were appreciated. She increased her volunteer work with local emergency services, participated in search and rescue training exercises, and began offering helicopter familiarization flights to young people interested in aviation careers. These activities provided the sense of purpose and community that she could not find among the fixed-wing pilots at her home airport. The irony was that Sarah's helicopter was probably more reliable than many of the aircraft that her critics flew. Because she maintained the helicopter herself and flew it regularly, she knew exactly what condition every component was in. Many of the other pilots relied entirely on annual inspections and occasionally discovered significant problems that had developed gradually over months of flying. Sarah's continuous monitoring and maintenance philosophy meant that small problems were corrected before they became major failures. As autumn approached, weather patterns in central Missouri began shifting toward the unpredictable conditions that made flying challenging. Sarah knew from experience that emergency situations often developed during transitional seasons, when sudden storms could trap people in remote areas, and when conventional rescue resources might be overwhelmed by multiple simultaneous incidents. She made sure her helicopter was prepared for whatever demands the coming months might bring. The emergency call came on a Tuesday morning in late October, when an early winter storm had moved through central Missouri with unexpected intensity. Sarah was finishing her night shift at the hospital when her phone rang with a number she recognized as the County Emergency Management Office. Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos, who coordinated search and rescue operations, spoke with the controlled urgency that Sarah remembered from her military days. "We have a situation developing at Devil's Canyon State Park," Maria explained. "A group of geology students from the university got caught in the storm yesterday evening while conducting field work in the remote section. They managed to call for help before their phone batteries died, but they're stranded on a rock ledge about halfway down the canyon wall." Sarah knew Devil's Canyon well from previous search and rescue operations. The area was popular with rock climbers and researchers because of its unique geological formations, but the same features that made it scientifically interesting also made it extremely dangerous during bad weather. The canyon walls were nearly vertical in places, with loose rock that became treacherous when wet. Getting to stranded people usually required specialized climbing equipment and considerable time. "What resources do we have available?" Sarah asked, already running through equipment checklists in her mind. "That's the problem," Maria continued. "The State Emergency Services helicopter is down for scheduled maintenance. The Air National Guard unit from Jefferson City has 2 aircraft available, but the Weather Service is saying conditions won't be suitable for their operations until this afternoon at the earliest." Sarah looked out the hospital window at the gray, threatening sky. Low clouds were still moving rapidly across the landscape, occasionally dropping down to obscure the tops of nearby hills. The wind was gusting strongly enough to bend trees and send debris skittering across the parking lot. She understood why military pilots would be reluctant to operate in such conditions, particularly with large helicopters that were less maneuverable in turbulent air. "How many students are we talking about?" she asked. 5 students and their professor. One of the students apparently has a medical condition that requires regular medication, and they've been without it for nearly 12 hours now. The weather forecast shows another storm system moving in tomorrow that could make rescue operations impossible for several days. Sarah was already making mental calculations about fuel requirements and flight time. Devil's Canyon was about 45 minutes from the hospital by helicopter, and the weather conditions would require careful navigation through areas where larger aircraft might have difficulty operating safely. Her small helicopter would be challenged by the wind, but its size and maneuverability might actually be advantages in the narrow canyon environment. "I can be ready to fly in 30 minutes, she said. "Let me check current weather conditions and file a flight plan." "Sarah, I need to be honest with you," Maria said. "I've already contacted some of the other pilots at your airport about this situation. They all said the weather conditions are too dangerous for small aircraft operations." The comment stung, but Sarah was not surprised. Tom Bradley, Mike Rodriguez, and the other fixed-wing pilots she knew would indeed consider the current conditions unsuitable for flying. Fixed-wing aircraft required longer, more predictable flight paths and could not easily navigate around localized weather hazards the way helicopters could. Their assessment was probably accurate for their aircraft, but helicopters operated under different rules. "Fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters have different capabilities," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Let me at least take a look at the situation and see if there's anything I can do." After ending the call, Sarah drove directly to Riverside Municipal Airport, where she found several other pilots gathered in the terminal building, drinking coffee and watching weather reports on television. The group fell silent when she entered, and Tom Bradley looked up from a weather printout he had been studying. "I heard about the situation at Devil's Canyon," he said. "It's unfortunate, but there's nothing anyone can do until this weather clears. I flew over that area last week, and even in good conditions, it's not somewhere you'd want to try any kind of rescue operation with a small aircraft." Sarah nodded politely but continued toward the hangar where her helicopter was stored. She had learned not to argue with the other pilots about weather decisions, since their risk assessments were usually based on fixed-wing aircraft capabilities rather than helicopter operations. The truth was that helicopters could often operate safely in conditions that would ground conventional aircraft, particularly when precise maneuvering was required in confined areas. She spent the next 20 minutes conducting a thorough pre-flight inspection, paying special attention to rotor blade condition and control system operation. The helicopter had been serviced recently, and all systems were functioning normally. Sarah checked weather updates on her phone and noted that while conditions were challenging, they fell within the helicopter's operational limitations. As she prepared to start the engine, Mike Rodriguez approached from the terminal building. "Sarah, I don't think this is a good idea," he said, having to raise his voice over the wind. "The Weather Service is predicting wind gusts up to 40 knots, and there are reports of severe turbulence at lower altitudes. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, "but I've flown in worse conditions than this. The helicopter is designed for this type of operation." "That thing is a 20-year-old training aircraft," Mike insisted. "It wasn't designed for emergency operations in severe weather. You're going to get yourself killed, and probably make things worse for the people you're trying to help." Sarah understood that Mike's concerns came from genuine worry about her safety, but his assessment reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of helicopter capabilities. The Robinson R-22 was indeed primarily used for training, but it was also a proven aircraft that had been operated successfully in challenging conditions all over the world. Age and appearance had nothing to do with airworthiness when proper maintenance was performed. She started the helicopter's engine and began the warm-up procedure, monitoring engine temperatures and rotor RPM while listening to radio communications from other aircraft in the area. 2 commercial airliners had diverted to alternate airports because of turbulence, and a medical helicopter from a hospital in the state capital had turned back after encountering severe wind shear near the canyon area. The radio reports confirmed that conditions were indeed challenging, but Sarah had expected that based on her own weather observations. Military helicopter operations had taught her to evaluate risk carefully, but not to be paralyzed by worst-case scenarios. Every flight involved some level of risk, and the key was understanding exactly what those risks were and how to manage them effectively. As she lifted off from the airport, Sarah could see several people watching from the terminal building windows. She knew they expected her to turn back quickly once she encountered the full force of the weather conditions, and perhaps they were right to be concerned. The helicopter immediately began experiencing turbulence that made smooth flight impossible, and maintaining precise control required constant attention. However, Sarah had learned during military service that helicopters could often penetrate weather conditions that would stop other aircraft. By flying low and slow, adjusting course frequently to avoid the worst turbulence, and using the helicopter's ability to hover and change direction quickly, it was possible to make progress even when conventional flight techniques would fail. The flight toward Devil's Canyon required careful navigation around areas where wind was funneling between hills and creating dangerous downdrafts. Twice, Sarah had to divert several miles from her planned route to avoid weather cells that were producing conditions beyond the helicopter's limits. The flight that normally took 45 minutes stretched to nearly an hour and 15 minutes, but she maintained steady progress toward the destination. Radio communications with emergency services confirmed that no other aircraft were operating in the area. The National Guard helicopters were still waiting for improved weather conditions, and local law enforcement agencies had suspended all non-essential flight operations. Sarah's helicopter was the only aircraft attempting to reach the stranded students, and she began to understand the full weight of responsibility that situation created. When Sarah finally reached Devil's Canyon, she understood immediately why the larger rescue helicopters had been unable to operate in the area. The wind was being funneled through the narrow canyon opening with tremendous force, creating swirling air currents that would have made stable flight impossible for aircraft with larger rotor discs. Her small helicopter, however, could maneuver through the turbulent air with quick control inputs that would have been impossible in a heavier machine. She established radio contact with the stranded geology students through a handheld radio that emergency services had provided to their professor before the field trip. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the geology professor leading the expedition, described their location as a rock ledge approximately 30 feet wide and perhaps 8 feet deep, situated about 200 feet down from the canyon rim. The ledge was accessible only by technical climbing routes, and the wet rock conditions made any attempt to climb out extremely dangerous. "One of my students, Jennifer Martinez, has type 1 diabetes and needs insulin injections every few hours," Dr. Warren explained over the radio. "She's been without medication for almost 14 hours now, and she's starting to show signs of diabetic ketoacidosis. We need medical evacuation as soon as possible." Sarah circled the canyon area several times to assess the situation, fighting constant turbulence that required aggressive control inputs to maintain stable flight. The geology students were indeed trapped on a narrow ledge that would be impossible to reach with ground-based rescue equipment. Conventional helicopters would have difficulty approaching the ledge because of the confined space and unpredictable wind patterns created by the canyon walls. The rescue would require precise hovering in an area where most helicopters could not operate safely. Sarah would need to position her aircraft close enough to the ledge for people to board, while maintaining enough distance to avoid striking the canyon wall with her rotor blades. The operation would demand the kind of precision flying that she had learned during military medical evacuations, but under conditions that were more challenging than anything she had experienced in training. She contacted Maria Santos by radio to explain the situation and discuss rescue options. "The students are definitely reachable with my helicopter," Sarah reported, "but it's going to require some very precise flying. I can probably take 2 people at a time, which means 3 separate flights to evacuate everyone." "Sarah, we've been monitoring radio traffic from other aircraft that tried to reach the canyon," Maria responded. "They all reported severe turbulence and dangerous flight conditions. Are you sure your aircraft can handle this?" "The helicopter is performing well," Sarah answered, although she knew that was an understatement. The small aircraft was being buffeted constantly by gusting wind, and maintaining precise control required physical effort that was already causing fatigue. However, she also knew that her helicopter's lightweight and responsive controls were actually advantages in these conditions. Sarah began the first rescue attempt by approaching the ledge from downstream in the canyon, where the wind patterns were slightly more predictable. The approach required flying between canyon walls that were separated by less than 300 feet, while maintaining precise altitude control to avoid both the canyon floor and rock formations that projected from the walls. The students watched anxiously from their ledge as the helicopter approached through the turbulent air. As she neared the ledge, Sarah realized that the space available for hovering was even more limited than it had appeared from a distance. The helicopter's rotor disc was 25 feet in diameter, and she needed to position the aircraft so that the passenger door was within a few feet of the rock ledge while ensuring that the rotor blades cleared all rock formations. The margin for error was essentially 0. She established a hover position about 8 feet from the ledge, close enough for people to step directly from the rock onto the helicopter's landing skids. The student with diabetes, Jennifer Martinez, was obviously weakened by her medical condition, but was able to board the aircraft with assistance from Dr. Warren. Sarah maintained the hover for less than 30 seconds, but the physical demand of controlling the helicopter in the swirling wind was enormous. The flight out of the canyon required careful navigation to avoid areas where wind patterns created dangerous conditions. Jennifer remained conscious during the flight, but was clearly in medical distress. Sarah contacted emergency medical services by radio and requested that an ambulance meet them at a hospital landing pad that was located about 10 minutes from the canyon. The landing at the hospital was routine compared to the canyon operations, and Jennifer was immediately transferred to emergency medical care. Sarah refueled the helicopter quickly and returned to Devil's Canyon for the second rescue flight, knowing that weather conditions would likely deteriorate as the day progressed. The second approach to the ledge was more difficult because the wind had increased and was now gusting to nearly 45 knots. Sarah had to abort her first approach when a sudden downdraft forced the helicopter dangerously close to the canyon wall. Her second attempt was successful, and she was able to evacuate 2 more students, including one who had suffered a minor injury when falling rocks struck his leg during the storm. By the time Sarah returned for the final rescue flight, word of her operations had spread throughout the local aviation community. Radio traffic indicated that pilots from Riverside Municipal Airport were monitoring her progress, and emergency services personnel were expressing amazement that anyone was able to operate aircraft in the canyon under such conditions. Tom Bradley's voice came over the emergency services radio frequency as Sarah was approaching the canyon for the third time. "Sarah, this is Tom at Riverside Municipal. I've been monitoring your operations, and I wanted you to know that everyone here is impressed with what you're accomplishing. We had no idea your helicopter could handle this kind of work." The comment was gratifying, but Sarah was too focused on the rescue operation to dwell on the recognition. The final approach to the ledge was the most challenging because Dr. Warren and the remaining student were located at the most difficult corner of the ledge to reach. Sarah had to position the helicopter at an angle that placed one landing skid very close to the rock wall while maintaining rotor clearance. Dr. Warren, who had remained calm throughout the emergency, expressed genuine admiration for Sarah's flying skills as she boarded the helicopter. "I've been on military helicopters before," she said over the intercom, "and I've never seen anyone fly with this level of precision under these conditions." The flight back to town was Sarah's most satisfying in years, not because of the technical challenge she had overcome, but because of the knowledge that her skills and aircraft had made a real difference in people's lives. Jennifer Martinez's condition had stabilized after receiving medical treatment, and all 6 members of the geology expedition would recover completely from their ordeal. When Sarah landed at Riverside Municipal Airport after completing the final rescue flight, she found a group of pilots waiting near her hangar. Tom Bradley approached as she shut down the helicopter's engine, and his expression showed genuine respect rather than the patronizing attitude she had endured for years. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," Tom said. "We've been making jokes about your helicopter for years, but what you accomplished today proves that we didn't understand what we were talking about. That aircraft and your skills just saved 6 people's lives under conditions that grounded every other aircraft in the region." Mike Rodriguez joined the group and added his own acknowledgement. "I've been flying for 25 years, and I would never have attempted what you did today. We were wrong about your helicopter, and we were wrong about your abilities as a pilot." Over the following weeks, news of Sarah's rescue operation spread throughout the regional aviation community. The local newspaper published a detailed article describing how a modest helicopter had succeeded where larger, more expensive aircraft had failed. The article quoted emergency services officials who praised both Sarah's flying skills and her helicopter's suitability for difficult rescue operations. The National Guard helicopter unit that had been unable to respond during the emergency invited Sarah to participate in their next training exercise. The invitation was both professional recognition and an acknowledgement that small helicopters had capabilities that complemented rather than competed with larger aircraft. More importantly, Sarah's relationship with the other pilots at Riverside Municipal Airport changed completely. She was invited to participate in group flights and was asked to share her expertise about helicopter operations with pilots who were considering adding rotorcraft ratings to their qualifications. The jokes about her flying lawnmower were replaced by genuine questions about helicopter capabilities and maintenance. Tom Bradley later admitted that the entire pilot community at the airport had learned an important lesson about making assumptions based on appearance rather than capability. "We got caught up in comparing aircraft specifications instead of understanding what different types of aircraft were designed to accomplish," he said during a pilots' association meeting. Sarah's helicopter wasn't designed to be fast or impressive. It was designed to go places where other aircraft couldn't operate and to do jobs that other aircraft couldn't handle. The Devil's Canyon rescue became a case study that emergency services used to train other helicopter pilots about operations in confined areas and severe weather conditions. Sarah was asked to participate in several training seminars where she shared the techniques and decision-making processes that had made the rescue possible. Perhaps most meaningfully, Sarah's example inspired several young people to pursue careers in emergency medical aviation. The students she had rescued, including Jennifer Martinez, became advocates for helicopter emergency services and helped raise funds for additional equipment that would improve future rescue operations. Sarah continued to fly her yellow Robinson R-22 helicopter, but now with the respect and admiration of her peers. The aircraft remained the same modest machine it had always been, but the aviation community's understanding of its capabilities had changed dramatically. Sometimes, the most important victories are not about proving others wrong, but about demonstrating that different approaches to solving problems can be equally valid and valuable.